back to CBI. We are going on to our third feast of Israel. These are the spring feasts that we're started with, and this feast is known as the Feast of Firstfruits. Let's begin in Exodus chapter 34, verses 19 to 23. The first offspring from every womb belongs to me and all your male livestock. The first offspring from cattle and sheep, and you shall redeem with a lamb the first offspring from a donkey. And if you do not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. You shall redeem all the firstborn of your sons, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. You shall work 6 days, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during plowing time and harvest you shall rest. And you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks, that is, the first fruits of the harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year all your males are to appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. Of the 7 feasts, 3 are tied to harvest. The first fruits, Pentecost, and Tabernacles are the 3. 2 of them are in the spring, and 1 is in the fall. This presents an interesting scenario for the rapture. Could these 3 harvests also be tied into 3 raptures? We know that we have a pre-tribulation rapture and 2 post-tribulation raptures consisting of the church, represented by the 5 foolish virgins, and the 144,000 Jewish evangelists. What was going on in the Exodus that represented this feast? The Passover was celebrated in Egypt on the 14th. The first day of unleavened bread saw them leaving Egypt on the 15th. They spent their first night outside of Egypt. The second day brought them to the Red Sea, and this was the day of first fruits. What do the Israelites going through the Red Sea have to do with first fruits? To answer this, we need to back up to the night of Passover. This will be extensive, so please bear with me. God said in Exodus 11:4-6, about midnight I am going out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. So the idea of first fruits comes from this event. Note that God's judgment was upon the Egyptian as well as the slave, the Israelites. It even extended to the animals. Many think of this as a plague upon Egypt, but it fell on the Israelites as well. All have sinned. Yet, as we know, God made provision to escape this plague. Psalms 105:36. He also struck down the firstborn in their land, the first fruits of all their vigor. The first time the word redeem is used is when God promised to redeem the Israelites after Moses' first visit to Pharaoh. The word redeem is the Hebrew padah, and it means to loose, and carries the idea of purchasing out of slavery. This is what God did, but it goes deeper than that because of the last plague. The last plague was the death of the firstborn. The firstborn is the first fruit of the womb. Because God made a provision for the firstborn to be spared or redeemed through the blood of the Passover lamb, he literally purchased them with a substitute. Because of this, every firstborn of Israel belonged to God, both of people and animals. When a firstborn male was born, he was literally owned by God as a slave. If the parents were to get their son back, they would need to redeem him from the Lord. They would have to buy him back. Consider this philosophical statement that sums this idea of first fruits. Quote, the firstborn is subject to the judgment of God and passes through that judgment unharmed and alive, unquote. Note that there is always a different environment on one side than there is on the other. We will expand on this notion later. As you can see, the Israelites went through the Red Sea on the 17th of Nisan. This is profound because the Egyptians attempted to go through as well, and the judgment of God killed them. The Israelites were able to pass through because they were now under blood covenant. As you have probably gathered, Peter talks about this event as a baptism. Note that Peter also mentions Noah and the flood with regard to baptism. Could there be a connection between these two events? Genesis 8:4, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mounts of Ararat. Look at that date. It is the same day as Firstfruits. Noah passed through the judgment of God and was spared. This might be raising the question, how does Firstfruits fit into this? There is always a change in environment, nature, or status, which causes something new to appear. Consider Noah. The environment he'd left would never be the same. He was the first of many in a new environment on earth. There was no longer a canopy of water in the atmosphere. Oxygen levels were going to be much lower now. Meat was not to be eaten but now it is. He represented a second chance for mankind, and we are all genealogically connected to Noah. Consider Moses and the people of Israel. They were slaves in Egypt. Even though they had left Egypt, they were still under threat of capture. It wasn't until they went through the Red Sea that they experienced freedom on the other side. They passed through the judgment of God, and those that were not God's people were killed by that judgment, just as Noah's flood had done the same thing. Looking forward, Jesus resurrected on this same day of Firstfruits, and his physical nature was completely different. There's much to gather from this. Now I want to look more at the celebration of this important feast. Let's take a look at another place where it is explained in Scripture. Leviticus 23:10-14. Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land which I am going to give to you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, for you are to be accepted on the day after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. Now on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, 1 year old, without defect, for a burnt offering to the Lord. Its grain offering shall then be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and offering by fire to the Lord for a soothing aroma. With its libation, 1/4 of hin of wine, until this same day, until you have brought in the offering of your God, you shall eat neither bread nor roasted grain nor new grain. It is to be a perpetual statute throughout your generations and all your dwelling places. Abib was the Jewish month that was changed to Nisan. Abib is the same Hebrew word for ear, as in ear of grain. The 6th plague was the hail that destroyed the barley harvest. We can find that in Exodus chapter 9, verses 31 and 32. Now the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not ruined, for they ripen late. As the barley was ruined, it is tied into first fruits. That is what is brought before the Lord as a first fruit. Joshua 5, verses 10-12. While the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month, on the desert plains of Jericho. And on the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. And the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. The new grain was not to be eaten before the celebration of this day. That is why they ate the parched grain. After this, they were able to eat the new grain. What is interesting is that there was a field of barley kept by the Levites where they would harvest barley specifically for the first fruit celebration. When the time came for the barley to be harvested, there would be great anticipation and joy. Keep this in mind as well, because it will become important for understanding. The three priests, there would be three priests who would take 3 sickles and 3 baskets, and they await the answer to the following question. Has the sun set? Is this is this the sickle? Is this the basket? Is this the Sabbath? Shall I reap? First fruits are about trust, reliability, and promise. It is about a future. It is about newness. Jesus said in Revelation, "Behold, I am making all things new." This feast is about baptism. It is about resurrection. It is a most joyous occasion. Consider that as the first fruits are offered, so is a lamb, a drink offering, and an offering of unleavened bread. Deuteronomy 26, 1-3. Then it shall be when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, and you possess it and live in it, that you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground, which you shall bring in from the land that the Lord your God gives you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. And you shall go to the priest who is in the office at that time, and say to him, I declare this day to the Lord, my God, that I have entered the land which the Lord swore to our fathers to give to us. This is all beautiful language. Now, when you consider that we are going to a new land, consider this first fruits. Consider this, because we too are going from one nature to a different nature. All right? And we're going to be gathered just as the grain is gathered into the basket. We are going to be gathered as well. First fruits is about entering into the land God has given. Now, the feast obviously looked forward to this event, and first fruits was to be honored when they arrived at that promise. They were the first fruits to enter the land as a nation. Note that the Jordan River even parted just like the Red Sea did when they went over. The first fruit then represents thanksgiving for what God has provided, and thanksgiving for what he will bring. Deuteronomy 26, 4-11. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord your God. And you shall answer and say before the Lord your God, my father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, but there he became a great, mighty, and populous nation. And the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us and imposed hard labor on us. Then we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction and our toil and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with great terror and with signs and wonders. And he has brought us to this place and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now behold, I have brought the first of the produce of the ground, which thou, O Lord, hast given me. And you shall set it down before the Lord your God, and worship before the Lord your God, and you and the Levite and the alien who is among you shall rejoice in all the good which the Lord your God has given you and your household. Again, we see great joy. This becomes even clearer when we get into the resurrection. The next thing is the prayer that they are to recite. And that's in Deuteronomy 26, 13-15. And you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the sacred portion from my house, and also have given it to the Levite, and the alien, the orphan, and the widow, according to all thy commandments which thou hast commanded me. I have not transgressed or forgotten any of thy commandments. I have not eaten of it while mourning, nor have I removed any of it while I was unclean, nor offered any of it to the dead. I have listened to the voice of the Lord my God. I have done according to all that thou hast commanded me. Look down from thy holy habitation, from heaven, and bless thy people, Israel, and the ground which thou hast given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as thou didst swear to our fathers. All right, this feast really shows how we rely upon the grace of God. Note the prohibition of mourning in verse 14. A mourner may not eat holy things. He is one whose relation is dead when he is obliged to mourn, for he is called by the law a mourner as long as the dead lies above the face of the earth, which is above ground. Or as long as he is not yet buried, he is called a mourner, and so likewise on the day of burial. Nor give aught, therefore, for the dead. For the necessities of the dead, as Aben Ezra, more particularly Jarkai, which are Jewish rabbis, to make for him a coffin and grave clothes, and so the Targum of Jonathan interprets it of grave clothes for the dead, though that of Jerusalem of clothes for those that are polluted by the dead. It may have respect also to the parentalia, or funeral feast made at the interment of the dead, through Aben Ezra says, there are some that say it was for idolatry, and so the person here speaking denies that he had made use of any of the holy things in honor of idols of dead men deified. And some are of opinion that all the above things may have some respect to idolatrous practices. Note that death is not to have anything to do with this festival. This is because it is associated with life and resurrection, not death. 1 Corinthians 15, 20 to 28. But now Christ has been raised from the dead. The first fruits, he is called the first fruits of those who are asleep. For since by a man came death, by a man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all shall be made alive. But each in his own order. Christ the firstfruits, after that those who are Christ at his coming, then comes the end, when he delivers up the kingdom to the God and Father, when he has abolished all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death, for he has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when he says all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is expected who put all things in subjection to him. And when all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself also will be subjected to the one who subjected all things to him, that God may be all in all. All right, Jesus was raised from the dead on this feast of first fruits. He is our first fruits. And when you consider what God's law was, Jesus is the firstborn of God's family. Because of that, he's born a slave to God. He is literally this first fruit. He is our first fruit in the resurrection because he has a body that is new. And it's the first one that we too will be able to have this body. He is the first, and that means there will be more to follow, each in his own order. This shows us that if there is an order, then that there are more than one. Jesus represents the first, then those who come with him at his coming, then those at the end of the reign of Christ. Note again that this points to the abolition of death. James 1:18, in the exercise of his will he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that he might be, as it were, the first fruits among his creatures. We are called first fruits as well. This makes sense since we have gone from death unto life. Even though we have not been resurrected, our spirit has been. The regeneration of the Spirit of God has made our spirits a new creation. And that's found in Romans 8:19-25. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subject to futility, not by its own will, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, which is the redemption of our body. For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one also hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. So by having the first fruit of the Spirit, we are assured that we will attain to the same form as Jesus, who is to represent what we are to be. First fruits is a picture. It paints for us what to expect. Expectation is the hope that is based upon a sure promise. We have that hope as Christians. Revelation 14:1-5. And I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. And the voice which I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. These are the ones who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And no lie was found in their mouth. They are blameless. All right, this reveals the first fruits of the Jews. The 144,000 had come through the tribulation, and they are raptured as they stand in heaven singing a new song. They come back to earth and represent to the Jews, who are still in their mortal physical bodies, what they will become at the end of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. The first harvest is the barley harvest. The second harvest is the wheat harvest. And the third harvest in the fall is the fruit harvest. Note that the harvest in Revelation 14 is a harvest of fruit. Consider this. The first harvest is the 5 wise virgins, and this represents the barley harvest. The second harvest is the wheat harvest, and this represents the 144,000 at the beginning of Revelation 14. And then the final harvest is the underdeveloped fruit, represented by the 5 foolish virgins and tribulation saints. And that is the Feast of First Fruits. God bless.